Hey, I'm Duke on Twitch. If you want to support the channel and greensunzenith.com, you can find my Patreon, merch store, and singles store where you can buy singles through TCG Player or Card Hoarder in the video description. If you want to get in contact, you can also find all that info in the description below for things like donation deck lists or just wanting to reach out. Alright, let's get right into it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of A Maverick's Perspective. This time looking at the One Ring. The One Ring obviously was recently printed in the Lord of the Rings Magic the Gathering set and has had a pretty massive impact. For those of you who, for some reason, haven't seen the ring, it is right in front of you. So we have seen it go pretty bonkers over the last few weeks, really dominating a bunch of formats, from modern to legacy to vintage. I mean, look at this turn from Juscanari where he's facing down a turn 2 Blightsteel and also Painter combo. And then on his turn, he just goes off. I believe he drew, I don't even remember how many cards I saw him draw, but it was too many. And I believe won that turn, obviously, off the Time Vault combo. It even took down this weekend's Australian 7-point Highlander tournament on the Gold Coast. Big shout out to Rick and Anthony, who are friends of the channel, and congratulations on their wins, both with decks, including the One Ring. So if it's dominating multiple formats, it's most likely going to be showing up your local legacy scene, legacy leagues online, or even bigger events. So you need to be prepared. So the TLDR, the best answer for Maverick is Scarwood Bandits. This card is really powerful when it comes to answering the ring, and I think is going to shoot up in value. This is obviously a joke. On a serious note, here's what we'll cover today. We're going to kind of break it down into parts: indestructible, protection, life loss, and draw. So obviously we need to destroy it. However, it's indestructible, so we have to find ways around that. And the reason I bring this up is because when you look at the artifact and enchantment hate in current Legacy Maverick, you have a lot of destroy. You don't have much, if any, exile. And this is a big issue for a card that, if it stays on the field, even for an additional turn, it's going to take over the game. And the card advantage your opponent is going to gain from the One Ring is going to be really hard to come back from, if not impossible in most circumstances. So what we have to look at are exile effects, and some of these thankfully have both A, seen play in Legacy Maverick before, and B, are tutorable, so you have virtual copies within the deck that you have access to. Tear Under is also a really interesting card that's been coming up in a few sideboards. I've seen it in Bug Scam, I've seen players playing it in Maverick, and I've seen it in, I believe, some players trying it out in Elves as just kind of a catch-all in the sideboard. For those of you who are listening to this, Tear Under is 1 and a green for an instant, exile target artifact or enchantment. Now it also has Kicker for 1 black, so that's Golgarian 2. If this spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. So as an instant, that's a pretty great rate on card for 2 mana, being able to exile target artifact enchantment, and then also just having that extra flexibility to hit something else, like a planeswalker or a creature. Masked Vandal is a 2 mana, 1 and a green, 1/3 changeling creature, which is relevant, and we'll come to that in a second. When Masked Vandal enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. So a few things here. This is an ETB effect, so obviously Masked Vandal already can't deal with something like Torpor Orb because, well, it won't trigger. It also can't deal with something like Rest in Peace or potentially Leyline of the Void because you won't have a creature in your yard to exile. This also means if you want to try to get rid of something like a Lion Sash and you have a creature, but they have a white mana open, you're also not most likely going to be able to exile that Lion Sash, because your opponent's just going to remove the creature, you won't have a creature, and you've just paid 2 mana for a 1/3. Congratulations. Master Vandal, however, has seen some play. Even Achilles, the Maverick himself, has played this from time to time in his sideboard, and could be a thought going forward on a Green Sun's target to deal with the One Ring. We also have Haywire Might, which is great because a lot of decks within the Maverick archetypes have moved towards Urza's Saga. Harry Hackett and Mark Strassman have really been championing these decks, both top 12ing or top 16ing the SCG Baltimore 10K a few weekends ago, with builds that are punishing Maverick with Urza's Saga. So Haywire Might being a 1-mana creature that when it dies, you gain 2 life and you can pay a green, sacrifice it to exile target non-creature, artifact, or non-creature enchantment. So obviously a little bit of restriction on what it can exile, being non-creature, but at the same time, really nice on rate. You're probably going to get it for free off the Urza Saga, and then just for 1 green, you're pretty much going to be able to Nature's Claim, but exile a relevant artifact like the Ring. So one thing about Master Vandal being a changeling is that it's every creature type. So that means with Minsc and Boo, if you did throw it, you'd be able to draw a card because, well, it's a hamster. But that also means that it's affected by every single Plague Engineer your opponent plays, because no matter what they name as a creature type, your Master Vandal is that creature type. So do take that into consideration and potentially don't miss that draw when you throw a Master Vandal and hit that kind of Maverick bingo card event. You know what? If someone actually does that and sends me a photo, I'll send you a Green Sun Zenith shirt. There you go. Little challenge. All right. So in terms of going around the indestructibility and working out some more exile ways to get rid of the One Ring, we do have some other really powerful white sorceries and a creature. Prismatic Ending does see play in Maverick. Council's Judgment kind of has been warped out of the format by Prismatic Ending, but still, you know, trading 3 mana for a 4 mana ring isn't too bad. And then we also have Skyclave Apparition, which does work a little bit better into Maverick being a creature, being both disruption and pressure. It is a card you can search for with Fiend Artisan, which is really nice. And you can also find it through Once Upon a Time. So in those sort of builds, you could look at Skyclave as kind of a really nice flexible way of removing things like the One Ring, a Planeswalker like Minsc, you know, some big creatures, like we're seeing a lot of 4-color come into play, so things like Omnath or Uro. I think Skyclave is really strong. Obviously a lot better in decks like Death and Taxes, where you do have ways to make use of its ETB multiple times through flickering it with Flicker Wisp or Yorion, but I still think for what you want to do with the card, it's fine in Maverick. Prismatic Ending for 4 can be difficult for some decks. However, most Maverick decks have 3 colors in their mana base. Then you do have, say for Abzan, you do have Noble Hierarch, which taps for blue. You have Birds of Paradise, which taps for blue and red. So you do have options. You might even be running Bujukabog in a Punishing Maverick build, and that gives you a 4th color as well. So although Prismatic Ending isn't a great way to deal with the ring, you can do it. I will note, it's going to be really hard to 1-for-1 your opponent on their ring, because obviously when the artifact comes into play, they can tap it immediately to draw a card. So that means you would need something like a Spirit of the Labyrinth in play, or a Pith Needle effect already naming the ring, and then get rid of it before they get to tap it. So in most cases, unfortunately, it is going to be a 2-for-1 straight away. All right, Protection. So when the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. So one quick thing, close your eyes. What card or cards comes to mind when you think about protection in Legacy? What are some cards you have come up against or played in your decks that have protection in them? Well, there's actually quite a few. You may think of protection in color, or a type of creature, maybe from a player, or maybe from everything, like Progenitus. You might even think of Mother Runes, which obviously gives protection to another creature. So protection isn't something that is too new from the format and has come up from time to time in certain metagames. Obviously with Mono White Initiative, we saw a bit of Blood Knight in the format, and back in the days of Shardless Bug, Mirren Crusader was pretty hard, if not impossible, for them to remove from the field outside of some sort of edict effect or neg2 effect. So obviously protection is given to the player, but that does mean that Planeswalkers can still be attacked. So don't forget that if your creatures are out and you think you're fogged, definitely make sure that you understand how this works, because you might just think naturally, oh, all their stuff is protection, there's no need to attack their Planeswalkers, it won't do anything. It will. But what if there was a way for creature decks, especially Maverick, to still attack through protection? Yes! No. This is it. This is the Questing Beast. This card is one that you will find a lot of players say, yeah, I've read that, I know what it is, and then do something and then have your opponent say, wait, it does what? So the main wording on here is combat damage that will be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. And obviously protection prevents damage. So Questing Beast is a great way to potentially catch your opponent off guard, who might have thought they had a turn to kind of set up and not take combat damage, when Questing Beast rolls in and takes us out. Questing Beast is a great card. I've had a huge amount of time with it online and a huge amount of fun with it, because obviously Legacy has some pretty unique cards. Glacial Chasm doesn't matter. Maze of Ith doesn't matter. Energy Field doesn't matter. Mother of Rune's Protection doesn't matter. Giver of Rune's Protection doesn't matter. The One Ring does not matter. So really, really cool to see that Questing Beast has kind of one more card in the format that it's quite good against. Obviously, you don't see too many Questing Beast running around, but I really like it as a kind of a top threat in Maverick, and it just really is nice to, yeah, have a good out to that, maybe one key turn where your opponent just thinks, if I can just survive one more turn, untap, draw a few cards, I'll be good to go. So QB, you've done it again. All right, life loss. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. So this is pretty tough, but I will say that if you can't remove the ring, remove your opponent via damage. It's obviously harder to achieve when they have access to Uro or other life gain effects, and probably even harder when they have a replacement copy to remove the one with multiple counters with a fresh copy that has no counters. But I would say that a little bit like Doomsday, after Doomsday resolves, and you get the ability to untap and maybe have a turn or two, it's really, really important to divert everything to attacking. And I think the ring is a big part of that. The issue is that a lot of decks we're seeing in Legacy right now do have access to actually getting this out sooner than turn 4. So by then you're probably not equipped with a board state that's going to be dealing lethal damage over 2 turns. So the life loss is relevant, but I think in a lot of decks they're either A, going to be really abusing the untap and tap of the One Ring and drawing multiple cards in turns, or are built around it in a way that the life loss is mitigated by cards like Uro or the life gain effects. All right, draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. This is Punishing MTGO, aka Matt, good friend of the channel's version of a deck that really goes after the key's ability to untap. So obviously in a deck like this, they're going to be drawing a lot of cards for the turn, very similar to probably the board state you saw in the Justa Gennari screenshot beforehand. This is a deck where, thankfully, a card like Collector Oof is fantastic, because there's a huge pool of cards that is hit by Collector Oof. And you can even see, with Matt's comment, the opponent needs Null Rod or 4 to 5 interaction pieces to have a shot. So being able to Green Suns for Oof on earliest turn 2 is pretty key, no pun intended, for this matchup. But you can see with the fast mana in Soul Lands, Lotus Petals, Mox Opals, Grim Monoliths. You're going to have a pretty hard time to slow them down once the deck gets going. So this is one to definitely look out for. So obviously tapping is an activated ability. So we do have ways from actually stopping our opponent from drawing cards from the get-go. That could be through Pithy Needle, naming the One Ring, or Collector Oof, both of which are tutorable within the deck, thankfully through either Urza Saga or Green Suns. So I think straight off the bat, these are two really good answers to the One Ring, but they're obviously great in different matchups. Collector Oof, great against a deck like this, but in a deck that's just splashing it as kind of like a 4 or 5 color value pile, not that relevant. Also very easy to get rid of with things like Swords to Plowshares, Prismatic Ending to Fairy, Needle on a similar sort of scale. So obviously the Ring is more of a card that you want to answer and exile than answer on board, which once removed, the Ring is now sort of opened up. The question is, can you have your cake and eat it too? And when I first saw people playing with Karn, obviously in Karn decks, I did think to a small metagame in Modern a few years ago, where there was a really cool green-white Eldrazi deck with things like, Termon Noble Hierarchy into Eldrazi Temple into Thought-Knot, and obviously in Legacy, you do have Ancient Tomb and some other ways to get a Karn out on turn 2, maybe a Ring, maybe a Thought-Knot, maybe Ancient Stirrings to look for the lands or the creatures. So it could be, interesting to have a little look at what can green-white do in this sort of space. I definitely wouldn't say it's going to be the best Karn deck or the best Ancient Tomb deck or even the best Green Sun Zenith deck, but I think it would be kind of sweet to look into something along this sort of shell. All right, so you don't have interaction straight away. Your opponent taps it to draw a card. What can you do? Well, thankfully Maverick has a pretty good variety of cards that do punish opponents for drawing cards. The newish one, Orcish Bowmasters, released in Lord of the Rings as well, has pretty much taken over the format. Maybe not so much by obviously it's very powerful, but I think right now a lot of people are just testing it in a large array of decks that is just getting a lot more play than probably it will in a few months down the line. But being able to hit both cantrips and creatures, two massive parts of the format, especially X1 creatures, you can see my other video on the channel on Orcish Bowmasters in the description below. But we also have cards like Leovold, which is great because you can Green Suns for it. Not typically seen these days other than some 4-colorish shells that do splash just for Leo, and maybe some Flusterstorms in the sideboard. And then Spirited Labyrinth, which is actually a card that a lot of people have prioritized over other taxing effects like Thalia in Maverick's main deck. So Spirit, really nice. However, of course, your opponent can still draw their first card in your turn. So yeah, it's good to know that we do have ways in the deck to also disrupt our opponent if they do get to the stage of actually drawing cards off the ring. I would say in this case, Bowmaster or Leovold is just that little bit stronger than Spirit, where obviously they both do a little bit more and aren't so kind of narrow straight into the draw card effect. All right, let's talk some spice. Obviously, Dak Faden, big shout out to Styfro and Styfro Piles. Dak stealing the ring is pretty cool, especially seeing that he kind of has his finger out as if he's going to put the ring on. I really like that. And I think that there is a world where you could play a light splash like you do with Leovold in Abzan splashing blue. You could potentially play Punishing with a splash of blue for Dak Faden. Target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards is also pretty sweet with Punishing Fire, because you do obviously not really care about putting those into the graveyard when you have cards like Grove of the Bomallows in your deck. But yeah, maybe gaining it is a way to get there. And Thieving Skydiver. Probably not a card that's seen too much legacy play. I've seen it as a copy in some sideboards of players who are still trying to play Merfolk in the format, and it's pretty sweet. Obviously better when it hits an artifact like a Jitte, but it can still steal the ring. So that could be pretty good as well. With blue, you obviously do have bounce as well. Not typically something seen in Maverick. You do have hull breacher as another way to attack straw effects, but I've kind of left those out just with Bant Maverick not really being in the position that the other versions are. All right, so how to go after the One Ring as a Maverick. These are kind of the 4 big points. Exile effects definitely need to come back to the front of mind for Maverick players and should start thinking about what's the best sort of exile effect for me and either my local metagame or what I'm seeing online. I would look at removal or disruption options that are tutorable to have additional virtual copies in your deck. So things like Needle, Might, or Oof through Urza Saga or Green Sun Zenith. But do come to the realization that it's going to be really hard to 1-for-1 trade with the One Ring. I would say, if not impossible. It's going to be really hard for you to have a board state where your opponent plays the ring without being able to draw a card off it straight away. So I think that's just something to come to terms with. And yeah, I think that for a lot of the decks, like we saw from Matt, Punishing Waterfalls, Collector Oof is fantastic because it shuts down a variety of cards, if not the whole deck. But for more of the 4-color or value decks playing the ring just for value, Haywire Might, probably the best answer. Just a nice way to remove it. And also just have a card that isn't sort of too one-dimensional, like Oof in that deck, where it's kind of just doing one thing. You know, at least the Might, gets rid of it and does its job. Oof, once in play, a lot more easier to remove. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed this type of content. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think about the One Ring. Maybe some ways that you're dealing with it that I missed. If you're playing it in a Maverick style or Loam deck, I'd love to know. It's going to be really cool to see how people build around this card, or how many copies become sort of the mainstay for a lot of these value decks that aren't sort of built around it specifically. That's me. Hope you have a great week. If you want to catch me on Twitch, you can catch me at twitch.tv/DukesOnTwitch, on Twitter /DukesOnTwitch, and of course here on YouTube at YouTube/DukesOnTwitch. You can also find my content at thegreensunzenith.com. A huge thank you to my Patreon fans as well. I really, really appreciate your support, and I'll catch you next time for another Maverick Insight.